Fear is the mind killer. This axiom is repeated throughout the Dune series. But is it not so that fear indeed stems from the mind? So to eliminate fear, one would have to eliminate the mind. So it is my guess that this phrase has a deeper meaning that regular language does not quite communicate properly. Perhaps it means, as Eckhart Tolle indicates, to quiet the mind temporarily. Simultaneously, the ancient people who we now refer to as the original Buddhists claimed that life is suffering, or more elegantly put, the word dukkha. But how can something as neutral and zero-point center as life itself have any kind of sway in any direction, especially that of negativity? How can the center of all things, life, be colored in any direction that is good or bad? Again, this seems to indicate a deeper meaning that modern language doesn't quite convey. If life is suffering, then this would indicate that the opposite, death, is indeed pure joy. And although we have learned in Book of Wonderful Suffering that death is perfectly safe, I still find it hard to swallow that this is what they indicated. After all, everyone would just and kill themselves. And if it were the case that death is without suffering, that would indicate that there is nothing to fear in life in the first place. But here we are, still afraid of fear. So this also seems to be a metaphor for something that words can't quite do. So the axiom, life is suffering, must mean one of two things: that there is another kind of life that is free of suffering, or it was designed that way on purpose, a purpose that we cannot comprehend without getting into the mind of the Zen masters, which is impossible. Meanwhile, far away from the Buddhists were a group of spiritual seekers that we now call the Gnostics. The Gnostics, without having known of the early Buddhists that we know of, set out to put this absolutely abstract idea into comprehensible words using allegorical myth and biblical scriptures as their guide of hypothesis. In their research of both inspired and cynical balance of speculation, they uncovered many inconsistencies that parallel origin myths from all over the world. Some of their findings are disturbing, but none of which are without a light at the end of the tunnel, as we will continue to learn from the Apocrypha of John here today. The Greco-Egyptian culture believed that a being from the waters of the deep called Enki turned against his reptilian fam to teach humans how to escape imprisonment. In 25 AD, the Kunlun people held that Fuxi and Nuwa used clay to create humanoid forms that they brought to life using their divine powers, and that a reptilian being called Zyanglu brought great chaos and turmoil to Earth, including causing a great flood that Nuwa is to correct. The Incan culture maintained that Viracocha created brainless giants from stones, wiped them out in a great flood to make humans, and of course, knowing the Inca, there were several reptiles involved to try to fuck up that whole plan. Within too many cultures to mention here, there is lore of seven-headed serpents just about everywhere. And every one of these myths has a common theme: the creation of human beings by splicing or interbreeding, along with several disagreements about how to go about using or teaching this new and promising race that we now call us. And of course, there is the other reoccurring theme throughout all cultures, indicating that Earth, a farmland used for the agriculture of experimenting and studying human beings, is oftentimes used in the same way that we use farms today, as a source of food. The numerous disappearances of human beings near cave systems haunt our species to this day, but most of the time goes untold due to being disturbing in nature and, of course, absolutely ludicrous in its own notion. So this forces us us to look at this lore as a form of parable. But before we sit back and relax knowing that this is all allegory, we should remember what we have learned on this channel several times. Just like evolution and creation turning out to be two words used for the same thing, and many other opposites that, upon further research, turned out to be simultaneously so. Just like the yin and yang, absolutely nothing in existence is self-sufficient, and in one form or another, physical or ethereal, everything must eat to sustain itself. Being that we are gifted and cursed with self-awareness, we are forced to ask ourselves one of the most frightening questions that can possibly penetrate the human psyche. This absolutely horrific question being asked is simple. Are we the top of the food chain? So the pleroma, being the unified field to modern science, was the medium in which repentance could be heard. She was not punished but forgiven and put on a pedestal so that she might fix this up. But her son, being strong and ignorant, if physical form that is already off and running. And well, here we are. Despite being born into that huge syntax error that is her son, the Demiurgos, it seems as if it is now up to us to realize the imperfections of that syntax error in which we were born into and embrace the great spirit that penetrates all things, including this fucked up part of the hood, you know, that bad neighborhood up there in heaven. I mean, there is a black dot in the white part of the yin yang after all. I think that hypothesis can be slightly backed up by this next passage that I'll summarize here. A voice came forth from the exalted Aeon heaven. The man exists and the son of man. The chief archon, Yaldabaoth, heard it and thought the voice had come from his mother. The image of the invisible one, who is the father of all, through whom everything came into being, the first man. For he revealed his likeness in a human form. An error of form, but still with the divine spark. As I read this next part, I want you to think of the double slit experiment and measurement problem in which we learned in our first video on this channel that actual defined atomic particles do not exist until there is a conscious agent to be aware of it. Until there is a sentience there to measure it, it remains in a superposition or a wave that is like fluid or water. And the whole eon of the chief archon trembled. The foundations of the abyss shook. The waters which are above matter, the underside was illuminated by the appearance of his image which had been revealed. When all the authorities and the chief archon looked, they saw the whole region of the underside which was illuminated. And through the light they saw the form of the image in the water. This next passage goes into the creation of Adam and hence at the birth of jealousy through lust, which is of course a problem that has plagued humanity apparently forever. And the powers began. Goodness created the bone soul. Foreknowledge created a sinew soul. Foreknowledge is sinew. Sine wave. Divinity created a flesh soul. The lordship created a marrow soul. Kingdom created a blood soul. And there is that, kingdom again that we have associated with DNA. And the sixth, envy, created a skin soul. Worth noting here is that the hair soul was created by the concept of understanding, the personification, that is, of understanding. In Native American cultures, as well as many others, it is said that long hair seems to work as an antenna that connects the human blood or DNA to the divine, thus propagating a higher understanding. So yeah, I quit shaving my head. LOL. LOL was in the notes. It's a habit, whatever. LOL. But this freaky ass unit of text goes on to detail the creation of the rest of the anatomy, including the right buttock and the left penis, called Biduk and Arabi. Ivan of Peaceful Savage Show. Let me know if I'm saying that right. Arabeei. First of all, I'm not going to pretend that the name of the personification that created the right buttock has got the word Duke in it. Isn't funny? I'm not going to pretend that's not funny. As far as the left penis thing goes, y'all can let me know what that means because I don't quite get it myself. And that's probably just because my brain goes into like a Uranus mode, that anything we learn about Uranus is just going to be funny. So, oops. Uranus happens to be the gaseous planet, by the way. The 4 chief demons who belong to pleasure, desire, grief, and fear. From the 4 demons, passions came forth. From grief came envy, jealousy, distress, trouble, pain, callousness, anxiety, mourning. From pleasure, much wickedness arises and empty pride. From desire comes anger, wrath, and bitterness. And from fear comes dread, fawning, agony, and shame. All of these are like useful things as well as evil things. I suppose useful in the sense of survival here on Earth. But now, I mean, this has got Buddhism written all over it, especially when you consider that called the 4 chief demons and Buddhist mandalas that show the cycle of life and death called samsara are being held by some kind of demonic forces or beings, and those are always laid out in sets of 4 as opposed to 6s and 3s, which is typical in mandalas. This continues on with our prior hypotheses about squaring the circle. The Trinity or sets of 3 represent divinity, just as circles did to the ancient primal man. But dualism, as laid out in suchness of the 4 directions, like the square, seem to illustrate the lower gross realms of matter. A note to self, try not to mention the black cube in this passage. The number of the angels together are 365. They all worked on it until the natural material body was completed by them. There are other ones in charge over the remaining passions. If you wish to know them, it is written in the book of Zoroaster. That's not in my notes, that's what the Apocrypha says. All the angels and demons worked until they had constructed the natural body, and their product was completely inactive and motionless for a long time. Motionless for a long time. Mud sat up, like the old parable. It is interesting here that we have angels and demons working together to create the physical human body. It's weird, but somehow fitting. So check this out and tell me if it sounds like the quantum hypothesis that matter arises from consciousness and not the other way around. And adding to that, it also seems to illustrate beautifully the Hindu concept of prana, or pneuma, so to speak, that is the spirit breathed into man's flesh of the lesser realm. The holy decree, the 5 lights, advised him that they should bring forth the power of the mother. They said to Yaldabaoth, blow into his face something of your spirit and his body will arise. The power of the mother went out of Yaldabaoth into the natural body, which they had fashioned after the image of the one who exists from the beginning. Notice the number 5 there. In that moment, the rest of the powers became jealous because he had come into being through all of them, and they had given their powers to the man, and his intelligence was greater than those of who had made him, greater than that of the chief archon. When they recognized that he was luminous, free from wickedness, they threw him into the lowest regions of matter. Jealous ass motherfuckers. Man came forth because of the shadow of the light which is in him. His thinking was superior to all those who had made him. When they looked up, they saw that his thinking was superior. Ooh. Pissed. They took fire and earth and water and mixed them together with the 4 fiery winds. They wrought them together and caused a great disturbance. They brought Adam into the shadow of death in order that they might form him again and again from the earth and water and fire and the spirit which originates in matter, the ignorance of darkness and desire and their counterfeit spirit. This is the tomb of the newly formed body with which the robbers had clothed the man.
the bond of forgetfulness, and he became a mortal man. This is the first separation. But the epinoia of the light, which was in him, she is the one who was to awaken his thinking. Possibly right brain hemisphere? This is the tomb of the newly formed body. It's a nice pun. This passage seems to finally bring up the idea of the Archons that, not being physical beings, would not require physical food like humans. Human beings eat physical food, thus humans eat suffering. I mean, whether it be a plant or an animal, death has to occur for us to consume. An ethereal being wouldn't be any different. They need to eat. Like the yin and yang, something has to consume something else for either to exist. The Archons must eat something, but being ethereal beings, they of course could not consume physical matter. They would have to consume some other kind of death. If you take time out of the equation, which of course is just part of our world and not theirs, then they could easily sustain themselves on perpetuated suffering, the toils of men, and now soon here, momentarily, of both men and women. It also, once again, hints at the idea of the secret message long hidden within our DNA codices. The beneficent and merciful one had mercy on the power of the mother which had been brought forth out of the chief Archon, for the Archons might gain power over the natural and perceptible body. He sent through his beneficent spirit and his great mercy a helper to Adam, luminous epinoia, which comes out of him, who is called life. She assists the whole creature by toiling with him and by restoring him to his fullness, by teaching him about the descent of his seed, by teaching him about the way of his ascent, which is the way he came down. The luminous epinoia was hidden in Adam in order that the Archons might not know her, but the epinoia might be a correction of the deficiency of the mother. This next portion is where we start to get into the imprisonment of man through chains made from man's own desires. They would let humans build their own prison bars of desire and fear. Humans simply wouldn't know that they were not free. The Archons took him and placed him in paradise. They said to him, "Eat that is at leisure, for their luxury is bitter and their beauty is depraved. Their luxury is deception, and their trees are godlessness, and their fruit is deadly poison." Monsanto. "And their promise is death, and the tree of their life had been placed in the midst of paradise." John asked the being that he's having this conversation with about the nature of this so-called forgetfulness that will befall man, and the being replied, "It was in his perception. For also he said through the prophet, I will make their hearts heavy, that they may not pay attention and may not see." Then the epinoia of the light hid herself in Adam. The chief Archon wanted to bring her out of his rib. But the epinoia of the light cannot be grasped. Although darkness pursued her, it did not catch her. He brought a part of his power out of him, and he made another creature in the form of a woman, according to the likeness of the epinoia which had appeared to him. He brought the part which he had taken from the power of the man into the female creature, and not, as Moses said, his rib bone. We said in the last video, coming from the heart chakra and not literally the rib. The rib that protects the heart portion, of course. Adam saw the woman beside him, and in that moment, the luminous epinoia appeared, and she lifted the veil which lay over his mind, and he became sober from drunkenness and darkness. Those Vatican guys definitely didn't like reading that, I'm sure. Our sister Sophia is she who came down in innocence in order to rectify her deficiency. Therefore, she was called Life, which is the mother of the living. Is Sophia of the Gnostics just Gaia? By the foreknowledge of the sovereignty of heaven. Through her, they have tasted the perfect knowledge. this is one of those manuscripts that if they took it out of the Bible before it was found in the Nag Hammadi, it's no wonder, considering it displays women as divine light that awakens the primal form of Adamu from his slumber. And we saw how they felt about Mary Magdalene earlier. Sexism is now as much or more part of the Catholic system than these ancient teachings are. The mother also sent down her spirit in the likeness and a copy of those who are in the pleroma. She will prepare a dwelling place for the aeons which will come down. He made them drink water of forgetfulness from the chief Archon, in order that they might not know where they came from. The seed remained for a while, assisting him, in order when the spirit comes forth from the holy aeons, he may rise up and heal him from the deficiency. The whole pleroma may again become holy and faultless. A species with amnesia that can remember, a sleepwalker that can become lucid of his dreams, thus being able to choose for himself when to fully awaken. I mean, that is some Zen shit, and apparently effortlessly done. But how? Well, let's peep up this beefy spot on transcendence. John asked, "Will all the souls then be brought safely into the pure light?" He answered, "Great things have arisen in your mind, for it is difficult to explain them to others except to those who are from the immovable race." Immovable race. Those on whom the Spirit of life will descend, and with whom he will be with the power, they will be saved, and be worthy of the greatness, and be purified in that place. They have no other care than the incorruption alone. They direct their attention from here on without anger or envy or jealousy or desire and greed of anything. They are not affected by anything except the state of being in the flesh alone, which they bear while looking expectantly for the time when they will be met by the receivers. Such then are worthy of the imperishable. And to have no care is synonymous with not feeling fear. So the way of the Tao it is then. John then asked about our fellow humans that might not be able to make the cut, so to speak. This passage does also gently hint at reincarnation as a growth process, as opposed to any kind of hell, which again is not mentioned anywhere within the canon. And the being replied, "The despicable spirit has gained strength. He burdens the soul and draws it to the works of evil, and he casts it down into forgetfulness. And after it comes out of the body, it is handed over to the authorities who came into being through the Archon." Most like the Tibetan book or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. "And they bind it with chains and cast it into prison and consort with it until it is liberated from the forgetfulness and acquires knowledge." So you go forward and up within this archetype of reincarnation. But how ironic would it be if that particular reality was the one that we are all in instead of the prior one that we've been speaking of? Like that kid Robbie in your 6th grade class that had a theory that Earth was actually hell. So I think that these 3 definitions of Gnosis are indeed not only parallel, but synonymous with each other at their origin. Direct experience as opposed to being told. The lost books of the Bible, the idea of etheric beings or forces that feed on the suffering of humanity. The second and third definition are, of course, easy to associate, considering that this Apocrypha of John seems to indicate that original Gnostic philosophy of the Demiurgos. And where I think the first definition comes into play is that this realization, this philosophy, this Gnostic philosophy, is something that can't necessarily be grasped by being told or taught this. And that brings into play the visions that people would have when they encountered the angels who exclaimed, "Be not afraid." They couldn't learn these things by reading them in a text or being preached to. They had to understand these things by getting visions shoved into their in third eye and literally going through the madness of this experience in order to understand it, which can be very frightening. Just like firsthand accounts, thus Gnosis, is more frightening than a classroom is. You gotta go in. You gotta do it. You gotta face the dragon. Which brings us back to the very beginning of this video concerning fear in the nervous system. It seems as if the one surefire way to be able to experience these higher sentient realities is to eradicate fear from your human nervous system. The body feels, it has desires, it needs food, and you are forced to constantly be taking something in or needing something in order to survive. If air ceases, not only do you cease yourself, but you go into great pain. If you don't eat, if you don't drink, many of these things are very painful. Not to mention the fact that lust and greed that causes desire are things that we become angry or jealous about when we don't have them, despite not needing them in the first place. So trying in an attempt to move away from that so-called pain, we have fear. We are afraid of going through that pain. Unlike Mary Magdalene and Christ, who were not afraid of being crucified. Not that Mary was, but you get it. So simply by completely understanding the Gnosis, the Gnostic idea that the human physical body is not real, they were able to bypass pain altogether. And if you don't have pain, if you don't feel suffering, then there's no reason to be afraid. Fear is gone. You can physically feel the sensations, but your mind is now separated from that stimulation of the nervous system. I'm reminded when Kennedy said that the only thing to fear is fear itself. That's absolutely perfect for what we're talking about here. If you can eradicate fear from your nervous system, you transcend, because you have emptied your cup of desires and selfish wills. And now that your cup is empty, there's nothing left to fill it but love. Love, of course, being that primordial first essence, that divine knowledge. Love seems to be not only the absence of fear, but love seems to be the actual first thing, so to speak. And now I know that's a weird sentence, but it almost seems as if suchness of reality, that in which reality can exist, seems to derive directly from love. Love is the reason that things are sustained. Love is the reason that things are kept. So knowing that fear is necessary for survival on Earth to keep the body alive, is it possible to love your own fear? There are those who might say, according to the law, the Hermetic principles of polarity, that love is the opposite of fear. But if you are to fold that notion over, therefore uniting those opposites, and fall in love with your fear because of its worth and what it does for the human body, you are now a completely indestructible being. Someone could rip your arm off and throw it into a river, and you are still you. If you were to get your head chopped off, clean cut, and just be alive for 13 seconds as just a head, you would literally, in this crazy ass sense, be in love with that new sensation of not having a body. Whenever the insurance company changes a law that completely f***s you over and your finances, you can be in love with the fact that turmoil and opposition exists in the world in the first place to better create that yin and yang that we can't live without, that we can't exist without. So if we can't get rid of fear, then we should fall in love with it.